Late one morning, Tornado and James were on the return leg of a special charity run. Tornado had invited James to double-head it with him a couple of days ago, after hearing how many passengers, mostly rail fans, had bought tickets for it. The train had ended up being 16 coaches long.
How are you doing, James?
The Red Engine had mentioned, on the run up, that he'd been feeling a bit of a tickle in one of his cylinders.
That tickle's still there, but it doesn't seem to be getting any worse. I should be alright.
Unfortunately, that wasn't exactly the case. As they approached Kildane, a loud bang sounded from James's cylinders, and a cloud of steam wheeshed out from between his wheels. A moment later, his driver threw on the emergency brake. Brakes squealing, the train came to a halt.
James, what happened?
Tornado asked, as James's crew examined him.
I think that tickle I told you about might have been my cylinder lining.
"You're right there, James," said his driver. "Your left cylinder lining's ruptured, and the right looks like it's about to go." James sighed, annoyed. He wouldn't be able to continue on. James was quickly uncoupled from the train and shunted onto the branch line tracks to wait for Jeff, the works diesel.
Sorry about this, Tornado.
Don't worry about it. You weren't to know it was going to happen.
As James's crew uncoupled him, the station master strode up to Tornado. "Tornado, I've just been speaking to the fat controller. She's told me there's an engine running late from Crovan's Gate to Knapford. He's about 15 minutes away, and she wants to know if you'd like his assistance?" Tornado considered the offer for a moment. While he wouldn't mind having some help to get over Gordon's Hill, he knew he didn't really have time to wait. A fast goods down from Barrow had already been rescheduled to accommodate the special, and Tornado didn't want to cause any further delays.
I'm afraid I won't have time for that, station master. Could you let Miss Hat know? I'll be taking the train on solo.
"I'll let her know." With that, Tornado moved off to rejoin his train. A few minutes later, Tornado had been recoupled to the front of the train, and he departed.
Good luck.
James called.
Thank you.
Tornado knew he'd need it. Tornado was running quickly as he passed through Maron, and he surged forward as he approached Gordon's Hill. He would need all the momentum he could build up.
Come along now, come along now.
He chuffed, straining to get the heavy train up the hill. He had to work very hard, and the beat of his cylinders grew louder and slower.
We're coming along,
replied the coaches. With a sigh of relief, Tornado crested the hill. As each coach moved onto the downhill side, his job became easier, and he was soon back up to speed. But he had needed to put in quite an effort, and he was rather puffed out. Tornado was relieved when he reached Wellsworth. He had a water stop scheduled here, and it would give him a little while to get his breath back. Some of the rail fans climbed down from the coaches and came up to take photos of the steam engine. Extra guards had been put on the train for crowd control, and they ensured the rail fans stayed out of harm's way. Tornado made sure to smile for the cameras. He was used to this sort of attention from rail fans. Suddenly, a deep whistle sounded out, and Tornado heard the chuffing of a steam engine approaching on the middle track. He frowned.
Who's that?
It wasn't a whistle he recognized. The two express engines looked closely at each other, and Gordon's eyes flicked up to Tornado's nameplate for a moment.
"So you're my replacement?"
Gordon joked.
You must be Gordon. It's a pleasure to meet you at last. I've heard a bit about you from the other engines.
I'm sure you have, Tornado. Nothing bad, I hope.
Not at all, Gordon. In fact, they miss you.
That brought a grin to Gordon's face. It was quite touching to hear that. "Come on, Jeddo," one of the rail fans called, gesturing to a friend who'd stayed on the platform. "It's the first and last of the Doncaster Drawn Pacifics!" The two engines exchanged a look.
You were the first Pacific on the LNER.
Yes, for just a few months. Sir Nigel Gresley sold me to the North West Railway just after the grouping. You've probably run more trains on the LNER than I have.
Not really. I was only completed in 2008.
Gordon gasped.
What? You're a new build?
Yes.
Tornado glanced over at the railfans, who were eagerly snapping photos on various cameras and phones.
This must be a real treat for them.
I can imagine.
How about we give them another one? I mean, this run started out as a double-header special.
The first and newest Doncaster Pacifics together, eh? I like your thinking, Tornado.
There was a bit more to it than that, Gordon thought to himself. He'd heard the other engine struggling up the hill, all the way from Marron Station, and could only imagine the effort he'd had to put in. It had been a very respectable performance, and Tornado deserved a chance to get his breath back.
I can't see why not.
While Tornado's driver spoke to the station master, Gordon moved forward to change tracks. A cheer went up as Gordon backed down in front of Tornado. Once the two engines were coupled up, the guards shepherded the passengers back into the coaches. The guard's whistle rang out a moment later, answered by whistle blasts from both Pacifics. Between them, the two express engines quickly brought the train up to speed. Houses, trees and stations flashed by as they pounded along the line. Gordon was grinning broadly. After being in the works for months, it was great to be pulling a train again, especially in the company of an engine who, although newly built, seemed to have inherited the spirit Gordon knew from his pre-Sodor days. Meanwhile, Alice and Thomas were waiting at Knapford.
Is James still sulking about Tornado's Top Gear appearance?
Not really. Tornado invited him to double-headed charity special with him.
James will enjoy that, I'm sure.
Alice grinned.
Yes, I think that was the intention.
Suddenly, the sound of a distant whistle drifted through the air.
That sounds like Tornado.
Both engines peered into the distance, trying to catch sight of the approaching train. As it came into view, Thomas frowned.
Isn't Tornado painted green?
He is, look. He's behind another engine. It's Gordon!
With one final sprint, the two express engines brought the special into Knapford.
Welcome back, Gordon.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thomas and Alice whistled cheerfully as the train came to a stop at the station. The Fat Controller strode out to the platform as the passengers disembarked. She spoke to Tornado first.
Tornado, I've been told about your effort between Marron and Wellsworth, and I must say I am impressed.
Thank you, Mom.
The Fat Controller then strode over to Gordon.
Gordon, it's good to see you again. I'm glad to have you back.
Thank you, Mom.
Gordon looked closely at the Fat Controller. When he'd had his accident, the question of the railway's next controller was still being decided.
Excuse me, Mom, but Jeff had told me that you'd been appointed the new controller.
That's right. I was voted in by the board a few days after your accident.
I'm glad to hear it. Congratulations, Miss Hat.
Thank you, Gordon.
The two engines were uncoupled, and together they headed off to the sheds. Later that evening, Gordon and the other engines were in the shed, and the sound of happy chatter filled the air. All the engines were glad to see the express engine back on its wheels.
You mean those two little terrors are in charge of the container terminal now?
They don't seem to be up to their usual tricks. At least not yet.
I'm glad to hear that. Speaking of looking after things, I heard you, Alice, Henry and James looked after the express until Tornado arrived.
That's right.
We did what we could, but, with our schedules having to be rearranged, wow, it was easy to be delayed.
Gordon smiled reassuringly at his friends.
I quite understand, and I know you all put in your best efforts.
He glanced over at Tornado.
As did Tornado, judging by how he handled that special today. I could hear you struggling up the hill all the way from Marin, Tornado, and I must say, I was impressed.
I did what I could.
It was a performance worthy of a true Doncaster Pacific.
Tornado frowned, slightly confused. He knew Gordon was trying to compliment him, but he didn't quite understand.
Gordon, what exactly do you mean, true Doncaster Pacific? I mean, you and Flying Scotsman are the only other Doncaster-drawn Pacifics I've met, and he was being overhauled at the time. I never really knew any of our brothers.
Would you like to hear about them?
Tornado brightened up.
Oh yes, please.
Gordon grinned. He and Alice began telling Tornado about their experiences, recounting stories of the powerful Pacific engines who'd once hauled expresses over the rails of the LNER and its predecessors and rivals. They talked through most of the night, speaking of races to the north, rivalries between the great four railway companies, and it was morning by the time they'd finished.
And so Mr. Grizzly was glad to see I was getting on well here.
Gordon finished. Silence fell for a moment, then Tornado glanced over at the other two engines.
Thank you for telling me those stories. I think I understand our heritage properly now.
When he'd first arrived, Tornado had told Duck that he hadn't understood what all the fuss was about. But now, he understood he was the heir to a long tradition indeed.
It sounds like I've got a lot to live up to.
Don't worry too much about that. You've been doing a fantastic job.
Yes, from what I've seen of you, Tornado, I can tell that heritage is in safe buffers.
Thank you.
A moment later, Tornado's driver strode up. Tornado, we should be going. We're due to be back at Darlington by lunchtime. Tornado's face fell. He'd been hoping to hear a few more of Alice and Gordon's stories.
I suppose I should get going. Gordon, I'm glad I got to meet you.
I'm glad to meet you too, Tornado.
It was a pleasure to meet you too, Alice. Could you please say farewell to the others for me?
Of course.
Alice replied. With one final toot of his whistle, Tornado chuffed off on his way back to Darlington.